Welcome to the Powercast with Charlie Johnson. I'm one of the world's leading fitness and transformation coaches. I'm going to be providing you with the tools to build your ultimate body and mind. Pleasure to have Stan Efferding, the legend himself, on the Powercast today. So thank you very much for joining today, Stan. So it was a pleasure. I bumped into you at the Arnold's in, obviously, the stateside earlier in the year. It's nice to have a chat with you now. Lovely to have you on the podcast as well.
Thanks for having me, brother. I appreciate it.
Obviously, it's a little bit of time difference, so it's nice and early over there in the States. So I really appreciate, again, you having you on this morning. So just for any of our listeners who aren't sure who you are, a bit of a background. You've got a very, very interesting background, I think, which for me is why I personally am so fascinated with you, is that you've got a very strong business acumen and background with what you do now, where you previously came from. And then also that you're obviously the world's strongest bodybuilder, IFBB Pro, and you've got a ton of other accolades. So maybe if I let you talk a little about yourself and what you've achieved thus far.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a hell of a roller coaster. I started out in college, University of Oregon, got a Bachelor of Science. I studied psychology and exercise science, and then I went on and started coaching and working with athletes. And of course, I was competing throughout all that time. I started competing in 1986. Actually, and I've worked with some of the greatest coaches and athletes in the world, and I'm fortunate for that. I've learned a lot along the way.
Did you initially go into powerlifting first or bodybuilding?
You know, I was a small guy. My first bodybuilding show, I only weighed 158 pounds, and so I wasn't very strong. So it took me many, many years, probably 10 years before I actually competed in powerlifting.
That's what I
pursued. I lifted heavy weights thinking that would make me big, and I'm sure we'll talk more about that later. But so it was mostly bodybuilding to start, and just lifting as heavy and as hard as I could to try and get bigger. I learned a lot along the way. I've been fortunate. I had, done very well in business, as you mentioned. I started a number of different companies that became very successful. And fortunately, I had the opportunity to come back, after starting competing in 86 through about 97. I took 10 years off to work on my companies. And then in 2006, I came back to competing. And by that time, of course, then I had the more knowledge, and I had more time, and I had more resources, and I was able to go out and train with some of the greatest athletes and coaches, Flex Wheeler, Mark Bell, Eddie Cohn, just about every guru in the business that you can name. I've probably worked with them, from Palumbo to Charles Glass to, indirectly worked with Chris Aceto and Kai Green's old coach.
Out of curiosity, what was your original business? Was one out of interest? Was it something to do with like reclaim belts in airports or something?
Originally I started a company. It was a telecommunications company, and I ran that in 22 states here in the U.S. and then did real estate. I was a real estate developer. At least I worked under a developer as a young man, and then I built multifamily and single family and commercial real estate and managed communities. And so that was, the first thing that I did. And then I transitioned into an engineering firm where we designed baggage handling systems for airports.
So I was right. I wasn't just making that up out of somewhere.
Yeah, that was, it's just been opportunities I just pursued, whatever financial opportunities were available. I tried to create, an opportunity to make money. It wasn't exactly my passion in life, which is why now I'm fortunate to be able, after all these many years, with the advent of the internet, we can reach out to an international audience, and I can actually work in the field for which I had a passion for from the time I was a young man in college. And that's been fantastic. So I have been able to create a business now with training and nutrition and a meal prep company with the vertical diet and vertical meals that allows me to stay in the industry that I love. So I'm working almost exclusively now in this industry as a coach and as a meal provider, and a host of other avenues that allow me to make a living in this industry.
With your progress, obviously, as you started off, who were the biggest influences who you think you learned?
Boy, looking back, probably, when you're reading the Weider magazines back in the late 80s and early 90s, of course, Flex Wheeler was one of the ones that I always aspired towards. And he, fortunately for me, I was able to work with him back in 2008 when I got my pro card. I was able to go down to San Jose and spend a few months training with Flex every day, twice a day. And we're still friends today. He lives down the street from me, and we train together regularly. And and have been for the last 10 years. So that was a huge opportunity for me. I learned an enormous amount and made, we should talk a little bit today about the differences between the way I used to train, the way I train today, and the way I advise my clients. Because, I've done so many things wrong over the years. I didn't have the internet when I was in college. And, you just listen to the guy behind the counter at Gold's Gym, and I got some of the worst advice, and I had to learn just by experience. And nowadays, of course, there's so much great information out there. Obviously, it's a mixed bag with the internet, but there's definitely filtering to the top. There's some highly qualified, very well credentialed individuals that are also competing in physique, figure, bikini, bodybuilding, and powerlifting and strongman, who have devoted their academic achievements towards their performance achievements, and we're benefiting from all the information that they're putting out.
100%. Out of curiosity, you referred to training twice a day with Flex Wheeler. I've actually had the pleasure of spending the weekend with Milos Sarchev, funnily enough, and he's obviously an advocate of twice a day training. How did you find training twice a day compared to obviously your powerlifting is probably very, very different?
Yeah, very different. And Milos is fantastic. I followed his writings for years, and I had the opportunity to do a seminar with him here in Colorado earlier this year, or at the end of last year, I think it was, with Charles Poliquin before he passed, unfortunately. And Milos is he's an extraordinary resource. I'm glad you had the opportunity to work with him. That training twice a day, it's interesting. And I saw a seminar a year ago where Alan Aragon presented, and he opened the seminar by saying the bros were right. And he was talking about a host of things that I think the better bodybuilders have learned over the years and kind of migrated towards. And one of them is the train every body part twice a week, to train in the 8 to 12 rep range. And then the twice a day training, doing the splits, the AM/PM splits, also seems now to be one of the better training programs to optimize hypertrophy. We see that volume and frequency supersede load and intensity in terms of progress. And I think that the splits give us the opportunity to train kind of a little bit shorter of a workout, maybe under an hour, to split the body parts up so you can prioritize them a little better. And you can stimulate all of those hormones that are so critical in initiating the supercompensation response for hypertrophy. And if you can increase the frequency and volume without undergoing, or creating too much fatigue so that you don't recover, which generally happens with those heavier loads and
CNS training, isn't it?
Yes. And to and beyond failure is another way to create too much fatigue to recover from. Now we're learning that if you can just get to within a rep of failure, kind of like feel the pump, Arnold talked about it in the 70s. And here we are all these many years later with the research supporting the fact that if you can get within a rep or two of failure, that's an adequate stimulus for maximal muscle fiber recruitment, so that you can get all the hypertrophy benefit necessary, and you don't necessarily need to go to failure. And that wasn't something I preached for the first 20 years of my competing. I was the guy who not only would go to failure, but would have somebody drag a rep or two off of my chest. And that, that seems to be kind of old knowledge now.
Out of curiosity, did you find that when you switched the training, you found your joint integrity improved and you felt generally better, like less that you've been hit by a bus because you weren't trying to deadlift and squat the world as often as you probably were before?
Oh, 100%. It's one of the things I try and focus on. I didn't squat one time or deadlift one time when I trained with Flex Wheeler for many months because we were focused strictly on hypertrophy, and we wanted to be cautious about how much damage we did, about how much joint damage we did, about how much central nervous system overload, particularly with respect to the lumbar spine with squatting. You start hitting the lumbar hard with heavy squats and heavy deadlifts, you're going to have a hard time recovering overall. And so Flex's motto, I think that he got from Lee Haney before him, was stimulate, don't annihilate. We used a little higher repetitions, which Flex is a huge proponent of. We did the 20 reps, although I must say the literature suggests that the 8 to 12 is optimal in terms of hypertrophy stimulus while minimizing fatigue. The 20s were pretty fatiguing, but having said that, we didn't crush ourselves on the 20s. We would do some single leg extensions for muscle memory, and then we would go to say a leg press, and then we would exert ourselves pretty hard on the leg press and do those 20s. But then we went to the hack squat. We were mostly working for a pump for a full range of motion, trying to get a good stretch in the muscle, and then finish with maybe some one-legged box step-ups or some lunges or more stretching. That stretching is a key component. It was interesting. Flex talked to me about that 10 years ago. In between sets of leg presses, he would make me squat down, and he would only rest us for about 90 seconds. So the loads weren't as heavy, obviously, with those rest periods. But I experienced a lot more hypertrophy. My legs got the biggest they ever were. I had more fullness throughout my whole body doing that type of training with a slightly lesser rest period, which, of course, made it so that you were a little bit fatigued when you started your next set. So you couldn't lift as much. You weren't doing as much actual damage. The eccentric loading wasn't tearing up the muscle as badly. So you'd recover a little faster. You weren't sore for 4 days.
Did you find out of curiosity that type of training kept you a bit leaner as well?
Oh, 100%. That was another huge component to it, is we didn't have to do any cardio.
It's fascinating. I've changed my training to very much like at least 2 days a week. I do a double session now, just like schedule depending. And I've noticed that already. Like I'm staying so much leaner. I'm fuller.
Yeah, you wake up the next morning with veins in your abs because the EPOC is certainly a scientific explanation for the excess post-exercise oxygen consumption from those high intensity sets. We didn't do any cardio. Now, historically, when I would compete in bodybuilding, I would employ the traditional, 40 minutes a day or maybe more as this show got closer of cardio. I would restrict my diet. I would take out some foods, the ones that everybody tends to take out, your dairy and your red meats and maybe some yolks out of and not eat any fruits, and all the mistakes that I think are made today. I used to do them. And I would lose a lot of muscle. I would get lean, but I would lose size. The cardio stimulus is contrary to hypertrophy. It's not consistent with the training stimulus, and I don't think it's a good way to burn fat or to burn calories. I think it sends the wrong message to the body, and it doesn't know how to adapt. You certainly don't want to do it within many hours of the actual hypertrophy training session. If you're going to do any cardio at all, you'd want to do it on a different day or at least 6 hours later. But I don't recommend any cardio at all for any of my athletes. I'm working with Nadia Wyatt, who took second in the Arnold and third in the Olympia. She hasn't done one stitch of cardio, and she's getting leaner than ever. And I'm sure we'll dive into diet, but I made some significant changes to her diet as well and let her keep things in there that I used to take out that I don't anymore.
I'm going to guess already it's a lot of that inflammatory foods.
Yeah, just demonizing things like red meat, like whole eggs, like fruit, like salt. Those things are critical for things like iron and B12 and choline for the liver, and fruit for the metabolism, increasing the body temperature, helping the liver convert T4 to T3. All of those things that we've traditionally taken out, I don't take out. Flex had me eating damn near 4 pounds of steak a day. I was training twice a day. I was 265 pounds. And so certainly I was utilizing it. But the iron and B12 in particular, especially for women, they end up restricting. They use egg whites and they use chicken breast, and they end up with anemia. And they end up having amenorrhea, which is the cessation of the menstrual period. Then their thyroid slows, and they don't have adequate excuse me, they don't have adequate biotin for their skin, hair, and nails. Their hair starts falling out. All of these things happen because of these restricted diets. They're told to take all of these foods out. They're not adding salt back in. They've stopped eating fast foods and packaged foods, and now they're not adding salt back in, so they're sodium depleted, and in particular iodine depleted. And they need iodine for their thyroid. That's triiodothyronine, and for their immune system. And this is why they get sick and they get tired and they get hungry and they lose their muscle, and they have these horrible adverse health effects, and end up at the doctor's office getting shots of iron and B12 and D3.
This is why they tend to rebound, a lot of them, very heavily after shows as well, isn't it?
Oh, it's extraordinary. It's terrible. So I avoid all of those things with myself and with my clients now. It was a lesson that was hard learned over many years of having done all of those over-restrictive, over-cardio preps for bodybuilding.
Because I know you're an advocate of using walking at short walks to help with digestion after eating meals. Is that something you'd advocate first thing in the morning, perhaps for the first meal? Or
Oh, I'm glad you asked about it. 100%. That's what I do with my clients. And whether you're dieting for figure physique bikini, or whether you're a strongman or a power lifter or an NFL football lineman, I work with all of them. We do the 10-minute walks, and it's not necessarily for fat burning. It's certainly to elevate the heart rate, but mostly it's for insulin sensitivity and for digestion, to improve your joints. All your joints are synovial joints, and they need movements in order to get oxygen into those tendons and ligaments and the collagenous structures. That can't be done because there's no capillary in those joints. There's like there is in the muscles. And so I encourage a lot of movement frequently throughout the day. I encourage 3 10-minute walks a day. And for the bigger guys, I might put them on a recumbent bike and have them do a little bit of 10 minutes of biking, if not a little modest HIIT session, because there's no eccentric loading on a recumbent bike. And it just pumps tons of blood in the body. Helps definitely, through the mTOR pathways, you uptake glucose from the bloodstream without the need of insulin, so you don't have as high of an insulin response to eating, and it doesn't last as long. So all those things, and the digestion in particular, are benefits for my athletes, whether they're dieting, whether they're a 130-pounder getting ready for a bikini show, or a 400-pounder like Hafthor. That's all the cardio I have them do. And if they do a brisk walk, and they swing their arms, and they get their heart rate elevated, they can certainly achieve, an adequate VO2 max to provide all of the cardiovascular benefits that's ever been measured to give you any longevity benefit. So I don't believe in the longer sessions unless you're specifically an athlete that has to run a 5K or a 10K. I think you can get plenty of HIIT training from some of your shorter rest sets in hypertrophy training, or when you can get all the benefits of good digestion and insulin sensitivity from 3 10-minute walks a day.
Yeah, I agree. It's something personally I've implemented myself the last few months is like walking fasted first thing in the morning for at least 30 minutes, obviously a bit longer than you're recommending. I just find even like cognitive function and everything, almost just like blood flow around the brain helps you just think waking up first thing in the day.
And I guess the only reason I say 3 10-minute walks as opposed to 130 is because I'm a big advocate of the frequency. If you can walk 30 in the morning and then
logically for digestion, it makes more sense.
For digestion, it makes huge sense. Immediately following a meal, postprandial glucose in the bloodstream is definitely mitigated. The amount of insulin that's released and the duration under which it's being released is drastically reduced. But I like the frequency of it, the frequency of movement. If you can, not too many people are going to comply with a 40-minute treadmill session at the end of the day after work. But the vast majority of people can find the time, and it's certainly sustainable to get 3 10-minute walks. You can put your kids' breakfast on the table in the morning, take a 10-minute walk, and come back and take them to school. You can go to work and at lunchtime have a lunch and then take a walk around your office building. I do it at airports. I do it at hotels. You can even go to a restaurant at night and eat, and then walk out the door and set your clock for 5 minutes and just walk down the street. When the alarm goes off, turn around and walk back to your car. It's something that anybody can do that's more sustainable. And
you can do it anywhere in the world as well. There's no excuse for that.
There isn't really. And even Hafthor up in Iceland, when it's snowing in the wintertime, when I was up there visiting him, we went to, he had a couple bikes in his garage. And we would eat and go out and we'd ride the bike in the garage and watch some videos on YouTube or the internet or whatever. And he would do that 3 times a day. He's incredibly disciplined. And I found that it has had major benefits. Kind of to transition while we're talking about Hafthor, I mentioned that people who diet, figure physique bikini people, end up experiencing metabolic adaptation, which we're all familiar with. And that can be more or less severe based on the type of diet you're on and the type of training that you do. Well, people who are big, who try and gain weight and muscle, linemen in football, and people like Hafthor, pro strongmen, power lifters.
And just for anyone who doesn't know, Hafthor Bjornsson's World's Strongest Man, or he won the World's Strongest Man, it's in the Mountain in Game of Thrones. So it's anyone who's not sure who we're referring to.
Yes, and Brian Shaw as well. I work with him, and Brian Oberst, or Robert Oberst. I work with him.
Some of the biggest human beings on the planet, then, pretty much.
Some of the largest guys on the planet, and they're not really interested in losing weight. And so I have to mitigate some of those health concerns. I do that in a number of different ways. they tend to experience, as I have again in my past, I dieted for bodybuilding shows down to 4% body fat, and I experienced all of the adverse effects of over restriction at times throughout my historical career, which I've since remedied. But I've also bulked up to well over 300 pounds to compete in powerlifting, and I've done that many different ways throughout my career. And oftentimes it would be a dirty bulk, and sometimes it would be the gallon of milk a day diet, the GOMAD. And I would get blood tests just about every month, at least for the last 10 years that I was competing. And I could see the effects of what we call metabolic syndrome, fatty liver disease, increased blood pressure, increased blood sugars, hemoglobin A1C up into the pre-diabetic range. This is the kind of thing I see with my larger athletes who have been using these dirty bulks, these pizza, pasta, pancakes style diets to get themselves, to eat enough to stay and to maintain the kind of weight and strength that they need to compete. Now, I can't shrink them down and put them on a vegetarian diet and expect
turn them vegan overnight.
No, I have to rebuild them. I have to improve their blood pressure and their blood sugars.
I would imagine is blood pressure quite an issue with chaps who are that size, because it's
100%
common problem. I imagine once you're pushing that sort of weight, body weight wise, I imagine some of their blood pressures are pretty high. I'm not sure how you try and get that down.
100%. And it was very publicly, with Mark Bell, we went through where his blood pressure was 196 over 100 at one point. And he was 320 some pounds, and his family was worried about him. So here's what I do, health first. Now, mind you, I did a video called "If You Want to Be Healthy, Don't Compete," because being healthy and being fit are two different things, of course. Health in terms of longevity, but fitness, being able to compete at a high level might not always be healthy. And so my job is really to mitigate the damage that you're doing to your body in order to compete at a high level in any sport. And this could include something like gymnastics, where 12-year-old girls are getting surgeries for, wrists and ankles and knees. This isn't just exclusive to huge athletes. It can be just about anybody who endeavors to compete at a high level and undergoes a significant amount of stress. Even marathon runners, who you would think would be the fittest people on the planet in the 50s, they start dropping from a thin and overgrown heart muscle. So just generally speaking, I'll focus on the guys that have the high blood pressure and they have the high blood sugars and the fatty liver disease. Initially, of course, in order to get the blood pressure down, one of the biggest contributors to that is sleep apnea at that weight. And so I make sure these guys get CPAPs and they start to remedy the sleep apnea. That can take 20 millimoles off your systolic blood pressure a very short period of time, just within a matter of days or a week. You can see results like that. I get somebody presenting with 160 systolic blood pressure that might go down to the low 140s just from implementing the use of a CPAP because they have apnea.
Funnily enough, I had something similar like towards the end of last year, but it was stress related, but my blood pressure was pretty high, 150, 160, and I've now got that down to 120. But like one of the things I started using was on the recommendation of a chap who helps me, Dr. Dean, is using nasal strips to open up my airways when I sleep, and that has literally changed my life.
Yes, sleep in general. If there's one thing that I focus on first, recently started working with Lane Johnson from the Philadelphia Eagles. He wasn't wearing his CPAP. He's 325 pounds. So I flew out there and we got him a new mask and reprogrammed his CPAP so that it was comfortable for him to wear. That had a dramatic impact almost immediately on his blood pressure and his energy levels. So I did that with Hafthor, did that with Shaw, did that with Dan Green. All of those guys did not have CPAPs. They all snored. They woke up tired. That's where I start. And it has a really significant impact on blood pressure. I know people talk about...
What's your thoughts on like using devices to monitor sleep, like the Oura Ring, out of interest?
I'm not sure I've seen much respect or I think anything that can make you focus on it.
Just makes you aware of it almost.
Make you aware of it. Think something as simple as weighing in the morning, makes you more aware of your nutrition. Taking your weekly pictures or anything that helps you track your diet can improve your results from dieting. And I think the same thing's true of sleep. I have a CPAP that it's called a Dream Station, and it tracks how much you sleep, and it also tracks things like the amount of pressure, how many episodes you had if you held your breath during the night. So anything that you can use that at least gets you to pay attention, it has a greater impact, because maybe you'll start to try and get to bed on time more often. Maybe you'll turn off your electronics an hour or two before bedtime. Maybe you'll work on sleep hygiene, like getting a darker room or a quieter room, or having the temperature right. De-stressing before you go to bed. Dr. Who am I thinking of here? Stasha Gomenak has a website for drgomenak.com. She's a sleep specialist. And Dr. Matthew Walker is another one who's on Joe Rogan, has some excellent stuff that talks about using things like a stress journal, a worry journal before bed, to sit down and write down everything that's on your mind, so you can just set it on the end table and offload it so you can sleep and not worry about it. It'll be there in the morning. The little things like that, getting adequate magnesium, 400 milligrams of magnesium, usually before bed is advisable. And even something like taking a warm shower has been shown to cool the core, which benefits sleep. So all of those things, if people can start paying attention to their sleep, it has a dramatic impact, as we mentioned, on blood pressure, also on blood sugars, also on testosterone. I get a number of people working for the fire department, young men in their 20s with testosterone in the tank, down 150, 180 testosterone levels, because they don't sleep. And when they do sleep, they don't sleep for very long. And they kind of chop it up into little 3-hour segments. And that is not beneficial for your testosterone levels or your thyroid function. And then women who get up at 4 a.m. to do cardio after 5 hours of sleep, their thyroid.
It's almost ironic, I find, that situation. They're probably better off sleeping for 2 hours longer
100%
than actually doing the cardio in the first place.
Yes, and Dr. Matthew Walker talks about this in his research as well. You end up losing more muscle than fat. Your body becomes stingy with the fat, as it's because you're starving it of sleep. And so those morning cardio sessions are definitely, you're stepping over $100 bills to pick up nickels, as I've said many times before. So that's where I start. I start with sleep with all of my athletes. And if I can get them to sleep more, they get leaner, their blood sugars improve, their blood pressure improves, their ability to hold on to muscle tissue improves.
What would you say is the goal in terms of ideal amount of sleep for a performance athlete? Or just
one more time?
What would you say is the optimal amount of sleep then someone should be looking for?
It's a range kind of dependent upon your workload. 7 to 9 hours is kind of a safe range. Some people are competing at a very high level and training twice a day, CrossFitters and strongmen and the like. When I was bodybuilding, I was north of 9 hours at night, and then I would take a 30-minute nap every day as well. And the naps shouldn't be too late in the day, and they probably shouldn't be over 30 minutes, because then you fall into REM sleep and you wake up groggy. But those are tools, and a nap will never take place of extending your sleep into the 7 to 9 hour range. If you only sleep 5 hours and think you can get an hour and a half of sleep in the afternoon, it does not make up for the lack of duration, because your restorative sleep cycles get longer and longer at night the longer you sleep. If you only sleep 5 hours, you're not spending much time in your stage 3 and stage 4 restorative sleep. So the length of sleep is what matters most.
So that's the most good quality, decent length of time. Did you find when you started paying attention to that, it made a big difference for you?
Oh, it makes a huge difference. And I also experienced this, and you had mentioned some about talking about during my years in business, when I was running companies, I'd started a number of different startup companies. And like most people, you end up diving in, sacrificing sleep, burning the candle at both ends, sleeping 4 or 5 hours a night and trying to work 16, 18 hours a day. When I did that, I found that my health deteriorated significantly. I had more stress, more anxiety, I had lower, poor performance. And so at some point, when I felt like things weren't going well, I was trying to figure out how to manage stress. And as it turns out, I was just so weak. I look at stress as weight on a bar. And if you've got, 200 pounds of weight on the bar and you're a 100-pound bench presser, it's going to feel that heavy. But if you're a 300-pound bench presser, you're going to be repping that thing out all day long. And the thing the thing that most impacts your strength, and I'm talking now in terms of stress and your ability to deal with stress, are the fundamentals like sleep, exercise, and nutrition. And I found that when I was most stressed and I was suffering from anxiety at the time, that I wasn't getting enough sleep, I wasn't eating very well, and I had rarely exercised. I didn't even have a membership to the gym.
Do you also find out of curiosity, your body fat percentage tends to sit higher at that level as well? Because
100%.
that's something I notice personally with myself and clients. Ones who tend to have the most stressful lives tend to struggle the most in terms of getting the fat off. And then because they're not progressing, they stress more. And it's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
It is. And then what we do is we run around trying to find ways to mitigate stress. And I don't think that's the correct way to go about it. I think that's the wrong direction. I think that you're managing symptoms instead of the cause. And, we're doing things like trying to minimize stress. If you're a businessman trying to be successful, you don't want to minimize stress. You want to be able to absorb more because that's where more money is made. You can't make money without stress. It doesn't happen.
That's a brilliant saying. I've never heard that before.
They go hand in hand.
This is true.
The more stress you're able to take on, the faster, the more you're able to, the greater the load, the more money you can potentially make. And the more effective you are at it. And so really what I do is I just go in and immediately, sleep is the first thing. If I've got to throw a CPAP at them if they're snoring and tired, or just get more hours out of them. And then the 3 10-minute walks, because they're sustainable. Anybody can do them. If you're too busy to go to a gym, that's fine. Nobody's too busy to take a tour around the neighborhood in the morning or at lunchtime or right before bed. And then the diet. And in many cases, this has been studied extensively. The most successful dieters are the ones that meal prep. And whether you prep or you purchase from a company that preps, of course I do, but I own a prep company, so it's easy for me to have my own meals shipped to me everywhere I go. I take them with me when I travel. If I fly out just about every weekend. I'm in a different city. I was in 10 countries and 40 states in the last year. And I travel with my food. I take some little 24-ounce thermos with hot meals in them. If I fly to Canada, I've got 3 of them. If I fly to the UK, I've got 5 of them. Whatever it takes. When I leave the house in the morning, I've got what I need to feed me until I'll be back into the kitchen.
No excuse.
I'll pack a dozen frozen meals. I was in Washington, D.C. for 7 days last week at the NSCA's National Strength and Conditioning Association's conference. And I put 35 meals into a rolling Coleman cooler, strapped it shut, and checked it onto the plane. And so when I got off the plane and got to my hotel room, which was an Airbnb with a kitchen, if you don't have that, then certainly you should stay someplace with a microwave and a fridge. I travel with all of my meals. And so I had everything I needed to eat. I woke up in the morning and I heated up my breakfast, and I heated up a couple other lunches that I put in my thermos. And I went off to 8 or 10 hours worth of seminars all day, and I never missed a meal. I ate on time the foods I wanted to eat that were good for my stomach. And that's one way that I manage, business people or even athletes like Hafthor and Shaw. One of the things I do with them is I manage the logistics. I work together with their wives to create grocery lists. I get, if I'm helping them at a certain venue, like the World's Strongest Man in Florida or the Arnold in Columbus, Ohio, I get there a day early and I go shopping at Costco and I get them everything they need and I help prepare it. Those are the things that are most important. If I thought there was something I could do for Shaw or Hafthor that was more important than prepping their meals, then I'd do it, but there isn't.
It's interesting you say that, obviously, about their wives as well. I think a lot of people maybe underestimate the importance of like a support network around the individual, because it's not just that person, but the people around them who support them makes so much difference.
Oh, 100%. And those support network, and we saw this, of course, when you read the book like The Millionaire Next Door, and the most successful people tend to be married and have, a pretty established lifestyle. And a lot of that is, again, just being organized and having things like regular sleep schedule, regular exercise schedule, regular meals. It's just like fuel or oil in your car. You as a businessman or as an athlete, those things have to be managed. And when you miss a night of sleep or get poor sleep from apnea, or you miss a meal or two, or you have to eat some shitty airport food and you get diarrhea and your brain fog from horrible food, that has a serious impact on performance, both in competitive athletics and in the business world, particularly for these people who travel a lot, who don't have access to consistent, regular food, and they're eating stuff at hotels, getting up in the morning and eating their breakfast buffet, which is full of sausages and those vegetable oil infested egg, whatever they call it. That stuff is horrible on the gut, and it manifests itself in all kinds of different health problems. The brain fog is the slightest of them.
I think the inflammation as well that comes from a lot of the heavily processed foods is a major issue as well.
Absolutely. And then all the autoimmune disorders that arise as a result. And people start taking antacids to try and manage their acid reflux, and then they're not absorbing their micronutrients anymore because they have no stomach acid, and they end up with deficiencies in magnesium and calcium and a host of other important micronutrients. So it's just a completely unsustainable method of trying to perform.
When so working with obviously the bigger athletes, is there anything in particular you look at first and after? Obviously, you've addressed sleep. You then go move on to like. I always fascinate in terms of the volume of food they have. Do you have any tactics alongside the walks to try and help with the uptake of nutrients and digestion?
Let's take a deeper dive into that. So these big athletes, first I mitigate sleep, which helps a lot with some of their health problems. If they have high blood pressure, secondarily, we want to get adequate potassium into them. Oftentimes it's impacted by thyroid function as well. It's much more significant than sodium could ever be as a contributor. Poor sleep will cause thyroid problems as well, hypothyroidism. So if I can get more sleep and I can get them to start eating a healthier diet, we got to take some weight off them initially. If they've got fatty liver and they've got those problems, I got to take a little weight off them initially. Hafthor came to me, he was 435 pounds. He said he was gaining more fat than muscle and he wasn't getting any stronger. So I took about 40 pounds off of him. I took about 20 pounds off of Shaw. And we just did that with some 10-minute walks, a little bit of dieting. Of course, we had the time. We weren't right before a competition. So, because you're going to lose a little strength with weight. Hopefully not much. The way that I diet people, one of the things that they realize is that they don't lose much strength. So
would you look at just taking their overall calories down, or would it be carbohydrates, fats?
Overall calories, generally fats. Most of these guys are eating too much fats, and because they need a lot of calories, and it's part of the problem. And I'll talk about how I redesigned their diet to allow them to bulk back up without getting too fat. So first, I'll drop some weight off of them, and that has a huge impact on blood pressure as well. It's probably 1 millimole per pound. If I take 20 pounds off of somebody, their systolic blood pressure is going to go down another 20 points. So between the apnea and the weight loss, we can get them from 160 to 120 in just a matter of 30 days. And then the blood sugars is another big one. And the fatty liver disease, unfortunately, you can't really test for fatty liver disease by getting a blood test and looking at AST, ALT. You actually do have to get, you have to look at a sonogram reading from an ultrasound to see if they have fatty liver. Now that can be fixed. The liver will repair itself. So first of all, you drop the weight off of them. Then you got to introduce plenty of choline and vitamin B12 and folate into their diet. And oddly enough, and it sounds counterintuitive, that means egg yolks and red meat. Egg yolks are high in choline, red meat's high in B12. So I reintroduce those things, obviously within the confines of the calorie restriction. So their fatty liver will heal itself. And that is definitely something that I've had great success with. Their blood sugars might be up in, say, the pre-diabetic range, and we get those down. So they're, the readings here would say like 5.8, 5.9 to be pre-diabetic. I got Hafthor down to 5.1 at 395 pounds. Then we started putting weight back on him. Again, initially the diet was I minimized fats mostly. I kept the proteins, lean proteins, generally from red meats. We go with the top sirloin. I keep fruit in the diet because it stimulates metabolism. I keep the eggs in the diet because of the choline.
Was there any particular type of fruit you prefer giving them?
Any juicy fruit. It could be oranges or melons or berries, any juicy fruit. And I don't do a ton of it. I just put in half an orange 3 times a day. It increases body temperature. It helps with the liver. I found that it can reduce AST and ALT enzymes, particularly for athletes that are using performance-enhancing drugs like orals. A better option is to also add in TUDCA and NAC, N-acetylcysteine, if you're really trying to tackle high AST, ALT enzymes in liver. But nonetheless, that also helps them maintain their appetite, because eating enough food is difficult for these big athletes. I get potassium in there, and that's, again, the fruit, a daily potato, at least, a potato daily. Those are big for potassium. Some daily yogurt. Calcium's huge. You don't want to supplement your calcium. That has been shown to increase cardiovascular disease, whereas calcium from dairy sources can decrease cardiovascular disease and improve.
What's your take on whey isolates and whey protein powders in terms of usage? Would you always favor whole foods?
I favor whole foods. If you're getting adequate protein, there's really no need for a protein powder. And
so it's just a very, very common question.
Yeah. If you're at a significant calorie deficit, I'm still shooting for whole foods because of the micronutrient value. You don't get iron and B12 and selenium and zinc from whey protein supplements. That's not to say that they're not convenient and don't taste good, and you can use them post-workout if you want as part of a recovery shake or something like that. That's fine, but I certainly wouldn't replace meals with them when you had the option to eat. I think in a good, better, best scenario, best is the food, and supplements can help augment a deficient meal or help replace a meal that you're not unable to get. It's really just
I agree with that.
Issue. So that's kind of where I am with the subs. I really don't recommend any supplements to any of my athletes other than, say, vitamin D3 and magnesium, which are hard to get from the diet, because most of my athletes are eating enough food. If you're a big athlete, you're certainly eating enough food. If you're a small athlete, a 130-pounder that's dieting for a bikini show, then you actually need the food. You probably shouldn't be supplementing, because you have less of a chance to get adequate micronutrients when you're on a 1,500 calorie diet.
And also, whole foods can be a lot more filling for you.
And it'll be more filling, and you're going to need that iron and like I said, with the whole eggs, the choline and the biotin for your skin, hair, and nails. You're going to need the B12, and you can't get that from. I don't think it's smart to get that from a supplement. I think you're going to want to get it from whole foods. So, I guess to redirect back to Hafthor and Shaw, whenever I get them fit, I get the body fat off of them, and I get their liver improved, and I get their blood sugars improved. Now I got to take them back up, because they got to get under a 1,300-pound yoke, and they need to be as strong as possible for that. So I eliminate the pizza, pasta, pancakes, and I keep the lean meats in there. I try and keep fats at about 0.3 grams per pound, just to make sure they've got their A, D, E, and K, and that they're shuttling nutrients. Now I drive white rice through the roof. After I get their fruit and their potato and their yogurt in there for the potassium, I'm driving calories with white rice. They both take in 1,200 grams or almost 5,000 calories a day of white rice. Super easy to digest. Doesn't cause them any issues with digestion, and they can eat a ton of it without getting bloated. If I try and put that much oatmeal or bread,
it's too much fiber.
Yeah, or even too much fiber, their body won't be able to handle it, and they'll start to get massive bloating, diarrhea, all kinds of problems. So that's probably, and as you know, for these big athletes, football players, CrossFit, strongmen, their workload is extraordinary. They need that fuel. And, I'll use this word because it's true. When you're using lots and lots and lots of carbohydrates, they're anabolic in that they draw glycogen, form glycogen in the muscle, and they'll bring 3 to 4 parts water for every part glycogen, and sodium. And all of those things create an extraordinary environment for anaerobic exercise and the fuel necessary for that kind of work in the muscle. It's optimal.
With your larger athletes like that, would you give them 6 whole meals a day then of solid meats, then no shakes, anything at all like that?
Yeah, I'm pushing solid meals. Just from personal experience, it was really difficult to gain or maintain a significant amount of weight on shakes.
It's interesting what you say about the carbohydrates again, because that's obviously, as referred to, I was Mila Sarchev the last few days. She's been banging the drums for the carbohydrate brigade, which I agree with completely. And I think people are afraid of carbs, I think.
Yeah, there is and if you've got an obese diabetic client who overeats, and they tend to overeat carbs, then restriction of carbs might be advisable. A calorie deficit, regardless of the percentage of carbs and fat, a calorie deficit with adequate protein has been proven to be equally beneficial, whether you're high fat, low carb, low carb. That was the Diet Fits trial out of Stanford with 600 people for over a year. When you control for calories and protein, where you move carbs and fats doesn't really matter. You get the same weight loss. And also it doesn't have any differential effect on insulin. The problem is that when you get somebody who tends to eat too many carbs, that's where you want to help them comply. And so I'll pull carbs out of their diet just because they tend to overeat them. That's really the only reason.
Cool. And in terms of training program, is there any tips in terms of recovery for them, which you work with in terms of the nutrition side of things you find work particularly well? It's like, again, something it was interesting that Milos was talking about taking an extra essential amino acids between the main meals.
Yeah, I haven't gone there. Milos is 100% on track with respect to the carbohydrates around workouts. It tends to minimize fatigue and muscle damage when you have more carbohydrates. And I'll even go so far as to say utilizing some sugars and 2 sugars. And this is consistent with the work, the NSCA's work and the recommendations by the ISSN, the International Society of Sports Nutrition. When you take in 2 different carbohydrate sources, let's say a glucose and a fructose, or a dextrose and a maltodextrin, it really doesn't matter. When you take in 2 separate carbohydrate sources, you double the rate of uptake and absorption of those carbohydrates. When you add sodium to that mix, you triple it. And when you add caffeine to that mix, almost quadruple the rate of uptake and absorption, which is very important for people who are training twice a day. That would be critical for UFC fighters and CrossFitters, etc. You absolutely would want to utilize that technique of putting together all 4 of those around a workout. It minimizes fatigue and damage so you can recover faster. And that second workout of the day, just your energy levels will be extraordinary. And I've seen this happen over and over again with my athletes. So carbs around workouts, that would be a time that timing.
Could you give a practical application of how, for example, you'd set that up with one of your clients with like a mixture of carbohydrates? Would that just be within the intra-workout drink? You'd have 2 different carb sources as an example?
Yeah, let me go through that very specifically. You might call it a para-workout drink. I don't like to suck down a whole lot of carbs before I train. It tends to impact my breathing. I get under a squat set, and I don't think I can.
You're bloated.
Yeah, I feel bloated. My cardiovascular doesn't seem to be as good. I get winded quicker. So definitely before every workout, I have my athletes take at least 500 milligrams of sodium. That's a 1/4 teaspoon of salt or 3 thermotabs, which are just buffered salt tablets that are easy to swallow. They'll do that 20 or 30 minutes before a training session. I travel with these salt tablets everywhere I go. If I'm flying on an airplane, I take them. I take them when I wake up in the morning. I take them before bed at night because they increase antidiuretic hormone, which prevents me from having to get up to pee.
Is that something you'd recommend for the majority of your clients?
100%. Yeah, because my clients are eating pretty clean. They don't eat fast food and they don't eat packaged food.
And what were the salt tablets called again?
The thermotabs is the salt tablet that I use.
I'll check that one out.
It's just convenient. It's just salt. You can go straight up with a 1/4 teaspoon of any salt, a sea salt or a table salt. One thing we didn't talk about that we should hit on really quickly here is that iodine is also extremely important for the thyroid gland and for metabolism and the immune system. And people don't tend to get enough iodine, particularly those that work out, because they sweat it out. And so I include cranberry juice, pure cranberry juice in my diet, but that can be hard to get some places. And iodized table salt is what I recommend to my clients. And I know that salt snobs don't like the fact that it's bleached or it has anti-caking agents in it, but the research suggests that there's really no downside to using a regular iodized table salt, and that something like a pink salt or a sea salt might not be better for that reason, because they don't have iodine in them. And if you're not getting adequate iodine, this is what happens with these bikini girls. Then they end up getting hypothyroidism and their hair starts falling out. And so you have to have an iodine source in your diet. I don't care if it's from sea kelp or from cranberry juice or from iodized table salt. Just understand that iodine is an important component. It's also more important than just thyroid function. So taking thyroid does not remedy an iodine deficiency. So,
that's the salt. That's quite a common thing, I think. And again, similar to carbohydrates, where people are almost afraid of salt again because of the mainstream media, I think.
100%, they are, and they shouldn't be. Salt is very safe. Dr. D. Nicolantonio writes a book called The Salt Fix that goes in great detail. And I mentioned earlier, the International Society of Sports Nutrition recommends all athletes take 500 milligrams of sodium before and after training.
Because in terms of strength, it has a big benefit in terms of strength output.
Huge benefit. Endurance, stamina, recovery. You'll go to a gym, and instead of having hitting the wall in 20, 30 minutes, you'll be running around an hour later looking for stuff to do. It's an enormous difference for your energy levels and your recovery. You'll feel fantastic. And dose it before and after. I had Camille LeBlanc and Ben Smith, CrossFit national champions, doing 1,000 milligrams before and after each event when they competed in the national championships. And Camille actually gained a pound over the course of 5 days at the CrossFit Games, instead of historically having lost 4 or 5 pounds. But she was able to stay ahead of her hydration. And that's significant for performance. A guy like Lane Johnson for the Philadelphia Eagles, he sweats out 5 grams of sodium an hour. He was tested by Dr. Godek's group, the Heat Institute. And they found that he sweats out 5 grams an hour. You can't replace that with food. You're going to have to add salt to your food, and you're going to have to take sodium supplements if you're an athlete that has that kind of sweat rate.
No, it's just fascinating. I think that's what, again, it's one of these small things that's often overlooked, which I think can make so much difference.
It's huge.
Do you have a recommendation in terms of water intake as well, where you look for people like?
And here's the thing:
the two go quite hand in hand.
They kind of go together. Dr. Sandra Godek is a PhD, and she runs the Heat Institute. She's an expert in thermoregulation and hydration. And oddly enough, she recommends drink when you're thirsty. Of all things, we don't have an amount per weight or whatever. Now, the International Society of Sports Nutrition suggests that athletes, particularly young athletes who aren't as good at paying attention to those things, drink about every 15 minutes throughout exercise. That could just mean that you bring a water bottle with you. Dehydration isn't necessarily a lack of water. It's a lack of minerals and electrolytes. It's usually a sodium-potassium issue. So, and you can actually dehydrate yourself, create what's called hyponatremia, low sodium, by drinking too much water. So if you're peeing clear, you're overdoing the water. If your only focus throughout the day is to drink that gallon of water that you're carrying around, but you don't have a specific plan for getting adequate sodium, then it could be counterproductive to you to just keep sucking down water all day and wondering why you still have a headache or you're got brain fog, and it's because you're low in sodium. And that dizziness that some people experience when they get off of the leg press and stand up, that's a sodium depletion. That's not water. It's not carbohydrates. That's inadequate sodium. So dosing salt before a workout, you won't experience that kind of lightheadedness. Even if your mom gets up from a seated position and stands up and gets lightheaded, that's a sodium depletion problem, and that can be remedied just by getting adequate salt on your food or using sodium supplements as necessary.
Now, obviously, with your own clients and with the strongmen we work with, obviously, you've got your own methodology of the vertical diet. Would you mind running us through that and how you set that up? Because it's just simple principles, but I can see how logically effective it is. And it's very, very. It is.
And, we talked through a lot of that. I build a foundation first. You can't put a 3-bedroom house on a 2-bedroom foundation. So whether you're a Hafthor Bjornsson, you're 450 pounds, or I work with a 97-pound professional ballet dancer for the Sacramento Ballet, they have the same biochemistry. They have the same physiological demands. So I create this foundation of foods. And I talked about some of them, and we'll just summarize them here again. I start with a red meat, a lean red meat, because of the iron, the B12, and the zinc, because of the preferential fatty acid profile. The red meat's generally about a 3-to-1 omega-6 to omega-3, whereas chicken and turkey is 17 to 25 to 1 omega-6 to omega-3. Red meat has a superior micronutrient profile, and it's easy to digest.
Because you always favor red meat over poultry, chicken, or turkey, don't you?
100%. I never eat chicken. I never recommend chicken to any of my clients. I start with red meat. If they want to throw a chicken meal in there, great. But I'm focusing on a good, better, best scenario with my athletes, and best is going to be the red meat. Salmon twice a week to get your omega-3s. That's definitely a big plus to get your omega-3s. I don't think that you should be trying to supplement omega-3s to compensate for a huge omega-6 intake. You can't be done. It doesn't work that way.
Do you still take an omega-3 supplement anyway, though?
Not if you're getting salmon twice a week. If you're not, then you can take a little bit of krill and krill oil or omega-3 if you want. But I don't see much benefit to it beyond what can be provided. Most of the research that was done, say on the Inuits in Alaska, was done on their fish intake, not on omega-3 supplements. So
yeah, true.
The challenge with me with omega-3 supplements is so many of them have already been oxidized through light or heat or processing. By the time you get them, I think there's very little benefit to most of them. It's been studied to a great degree. Some are better than others, I'm sure, but you can probably get your best benefit from eating a salmon. And then I jump in and I look for, other micronutrient-dense foods. Obviously, the egg, as I mentioned earlier, the whole egg, don't take the yolk out. That's where all the choline and the biotin and the K2 is. So I have eggs in all my athletes' diets. Brian Shaw eats 36 whole eggs a day, 6 with each of 6 meals.
Yeah, 6 with each meal?
6 with each meal.
Jesus
and
Christ.
again, because he had fatty liver disease, and I wanted to get adequate choline in him to fix that problem, and now he doesn't. We remedied that. His blood sugars are better. Choline's a huge component of that, and B12 as well, and folate if you're going to tackle fatty liver disease effectively. So once we get, and so people are concerned about 2 things. One, cholesterol, and at least here in the U.S., Department of Agriculture and their dietary guidelines, they no longer identify eggs as a nutrient of concern with respect to cholesterol, and the cholesterol is not associated with cardiovascular disease unless potentially you have a hypercholesteremia, which is an inherited genetic familial condition. So he doesn't have that. We don't have that problem. And the studies that have been done on burn patients eating 36 eggs a day, because it's the nutrient that gives them the fastest healing from their injuries, have shown that they don't have an increase in cholesterol. So 36 a day is where I have Thor. I don't recommend that for everyone, obviously, but I do put eggs in everyone's diet, including my 124-pound Nadia Wyatt getting ready for the Miss Olympia. She eats at least 2 whole eggs a day. I would never take a yolk out and throw some peanut butter in there for quote-unquote healthy fats. A, because it's a terrible protein, and B, because it's a high omega-6 fat. So I don't believe in the whole peanut butter, almond butter thing. I think it's just lazy.
Are you a fan of nuts as a source of fats generally, or not so much? You'd always go for eggs?
No, I think the fats are in your foods. I think they're in the red meat, which is over 50% monounsaturated fat, the healthy fat. And they're in your egg yolks, and they're in your fish, and they're in your yogurt. I think the fats are already in the foods. Your omega-3s are in the fish. Some people like to talk about using things like coconut oil or
MCT oil.
Yeah, olive oil or things like that. And I don't think you really need to go there. I don't see any additional benefit beyond what's already in those great foods, so long as you're getting all of them to an adequate amount. Well, then I'm chasing, so I've got my proteins, right? That's about probably a gram per pound. Someone like Nadia, dieting for a show at a calorie deficit and trying to work out, she might eat 1.2 grams per pound. And that's consistent with the ISSN's research. Somebody like Hafthor, or somebody who's trying to gain weight, I might only have them have 0.7 grams of protein per pound, because protein's a high thermic effect and it's very satiating, hard to eat enough calories when you're taking in too much protein. And the carbohydrates that I would be putting in an athlete that's trying to gain weight are protein sparing. So they would get all the benefit of hypertrophy and muscle gain from 0.7 grams per pound without any of the potential drawbacks of poor appetite or fewer net calories from consuming too much protein. And I've made that mistake many times throughout my career, where I thought adding more protein would make me bigger, but I'd end up losing weight because it's sure hard as hell to eat enough lean protein. And it's difficult to gain weight under that. So that's my proteins. My fats are in the proteins. Then we go to carbs. And again, I start with high potassium carbs, fruit.
This is where your notorious monster mash comes.
Yeah, the monster mash. And that's actually the next evolution. So I'll hit, I get some fruit in there daily. We talked about earlier. I get some potatoes in there daily. Potatoes can be very satiating. And so if I'm using those with athletes that are trying to gain weight, The potato might go in the pre-workout meal, and it might go in the pre-bedtime meal, because then the satiating effects of those don't matter. Before a workout, you're not going to be eating for another 4 or 5 hours generally. And at nighttime, if you're taking a potato, you're going to be sleeping for 8 hours. So,
one question. What's your thoughts on, there's some research to suggest that depending on what part of the world you're from, like you have a genetic predisposition to certain food groups working better for you digestively. So, for example, I don't know if you're Asian, rices, from Eastern Europe, potatoes, that sort of thing.
I haven't seen enough compelling research to suggest that people have I think that we've adapted over a great many millennia that we can handle a whole host of foods.
Yeah,
the only thing
curious.
I really look out for, the specific thing I look out for with my diet is that I stay with low FODMAP foods, fermentable oligomonosaccharides, foods that cause a lot of gas and bloating, such as, say, broccoli, cruciferous vegetables. I'd rather get low gas vegetables like spinach and cucumber and squash. Root tubers like carrots and potatoes. They tend to be easier digested than some of those high gas vegetables. Legumes can be hard to digest. I'm not saying they're bad for you, but in any significant quantity, and depending on how you prepare them and how much you eat, you can end up with gas. Those get into the large intestine undigested, and they get broken down by bacteria and turned into methane, and you're walking around bloated and gassy all the time. So I have to be careful of that with my athletes. That's why I'm not big on lots of grains, even oatmeal or bread, because they can be harder to digest. And again, it's individualistic and dose dependent. It's how much you eat and how they're prepared. Sourdough bread will be easier to digest. And oatmeal that's been soaked and fermented overnight using, say, some yogurt or apple cider vinegar will be much easier to digest. But I can't put 3 or 4 cups of oatmeal in a big athlete multiple days in a row and expect them not to have gut problems and digestion problems. I saw that with one of my athletes recently. A dietitian had recommended he eat 4 cups of quinoa a day.
Jesus.
He couldn't do it. And I'm like, yeah, no shit. Your dietitian never tried that.
Yeah, literally.
Sometimes you read things in a book or you put them in a chronometer and they look good on paper, but that kind of gets us down to the monster mash. There are things that are easier to eat than others. And when you use a ground bison and you mash it up with some white rice and put a little bone broth in there and eat that, it's really easy on the stomach. And if you're an athlete that has to take in 5, 6, 7,000 calories a day, or even if you're an individual that has a history of digestion problems, IBS, and a host of other potential, Crohn's disease, etc., when you're given foods that are easy on the gut can start to repair itself. And it becomes easier to eat, then eventually add more and more foods.
Would you ever supplement with glutamine? Because that's supposed to be helpful in terms of repairing gut health, or you're more of a whole foods man?
The thing about glutamine, there isn't much research to suggest it's beneficial. It's the most abundant amino acid in the body, and it's in all your protein sources. So as of yet, no, I don't see. I think that the big thing with gut problems is to take away the source of the problem.
Yeah,
I'm trying to
the inflammatory
alcohols. Yeah, I'm just being really cautious with the things that typically aggravate your stomach, and I'm looking at the acidity of the stomach. If people are taking antacids, they're setting themselves up for a lot of problems, the least of which is digestion problems, the most of which is nutrient deficiencies, because you don't have good absorption of your minerals and electrolytes. So I'm really cautious about trying to make sure. Sometimes I might even supplement for some people an HCl pepsin, mostly just to get their stomach acid, to get more acid and to get the pH down low enough to where they're actually effectively digesting their food. And even something as simple as chewing the food better can have a significant impact on people who have recurring problems with acid reflux. So I am paying attention to those things. I do want good gut health first and foremost, and everything else seems to take care of itself.
Cool. Awesome. And is there any other diet tips from the vertical diet you think you can add to that before we start wrapping this up? Because I don't want to keep you too long. So now we're running over just over an hour now already.
No, I think that's the bulk of it. I think we hit on it. Finding easy to digest foods that are highly nutrient dense and bioavailable. I think that's the big thing, and to make sure and get be organized and consistent with it, because when you have to start picking up stuff from restaurants or airports, etc., I think that you're just going to continue doing damage to your your digestion.
100% agree. And one final tip, obviously you yourself are an incredibly busy businessman and come from a corporate background, having been highly successful. What would be the biggest tip you give to anyone who's struggling, trying to manage everything in terms of training, diet? Because that's the main excuse I hear from most people.
Yeah, well, we touched on a little bit of it. Getting organized. Meal prep is a monster. You save money, you save time.
Agree.
Getting adequate sleep. You cannot be burning the candle at both ends, because then you just be more effective. We talked about stress and how I view it as a weight. And if you're doing your 10-minute walks 3 times a day and you're prepping your meals and you're sleeping adequately, you find that you have more time because you're organized.
You've got control.
Yes. And then I think people overemphasize how much time and energy they have to pour into their nutrition and training. The meal prep is simple. It saves you time and money. As for exercise, cardio is not a good way to lose weight. And it's been studied. You take a group that's dieting and a group that's dieting and doing cardio, there's very little difference between the two. So this idea that you need to commit 40 minutes of your day to a treadmill or what have you, I think that the return on that investment is very small, and that's been researched. So utilize something that's simple and sustainable and fits in your work schedule, such as the 10-minute walks. I think that's a huge boon for most people. Contributes. I think it gives you a big return on your investment. Exercise is great for health, but exercise for losing weight is not a great way to invest your time. You want to control your nutrition to lose weight. 98% of weight loss happens in the kitchen, so you want to be more disciplined in terms of meal prep. And then lastly, the training component. People get frustrated because they don't think they can work out enough, or they have to put too many hours into the gym. Nothing could be further from the truth. You need to work out each body part twice a week is optimal. You need to get a minimum of about 5 sets per workout per body part. So you could do a full body workout on Monday and Friday, and you could go in and do 5 sets of squats supersetted with 5 sets of hamstring curls, and then go do over 5 sets of dips with 5 sets supersetted with 5 sets of chin-ups. That in itself would be enough not only to maintain, but to gain if the intensity was sufficient enough. And you could do that entire workout in 40 minutes twice a week.
And get awesome results.
Oh, and get fantastic results. There's been many times over the last couple of years where that's all I've been able to do. And you see me on Instagram, I'm still able to squat over 600 pounds regularly for reps. So it's not because I'm putting more hours in the gym. I'm putting in less, smarter hours. I get people that have busy schedules. They work, say they're a doctor or a nurse, and they've got, Monday through Friday, they're working these 12, 14-hour shifts. I'll have them do like a full body workout on Wednesday night, the one I just described, squat, hamstring superset with a dip chin-up superset. And then on weekends, I'll have them do a split. They're off on Saturday and Sunday, and they're rested and they're well fed. So I'll have them do a back Saturday morning, chest Saturday night, squats Sunday morning, deadlift Sunday night. And those are only 40-minute sessions. I'm not asking them to be in there for 2.5 hours each session. And that would be an advanced program for a busy individual who wanted to get everything they could out of their training, but had a high work demand.
Nice. It's just clever programming and being efficient with what you're doing is what makes the biggest difference. I think that's hugely insightful. And I think, again, it just proves if you've got the right mindset, you can achieve anything you want to achieve. You just have to have the why of why you're training and why you're trying to diet in the first place, in my opinion.
Yeah, I just think that you need to create a schedule that works rather than setting up these expectations that are unsustainable. If I give somebody a 40-minute treadmill a day, how long is that going to happen for? Give that to a housewife who's got kids and a job and everything else. You're doing them a disservice, making them even think that that's necessary, let alone sustainable.
No, 100% agree. 100% agree. That's some wonderful advice there to finish off with, Stan. So I really, really appreciate having you on the podcast today. So thank you so much.
Awesome. Thanks for having
some more info about you and obviously your meal prep businesses and some of the other bits and pieces you do.
Yeah, well, all of it's at stanefferding.com. I have my vertical diet digital download, the Vertical Diet 3.0, which goes over everything we discussed. And I have over 200 scientific references for peer-reviewed published research, along with articles and videos from all of the professionals in the industry that helps take a deeper dive into the things that we talked about. That's all part of the Vertical Diet 3.0. That's all at stanefferding.com. Stan Efferding is my Instagram, and Stan Efferding is my YouTube, and I have a lot of rants on there that discuss a lot of the things that you and I just talked about today that are, I think, fun to listen to.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of those. So I have watched a fair few of them, which I've already gathered some of the initial information. So I really, really appreciate that. But
awesome. Thanks, brother. Appreciate
thank
it.
you so much for today, Stan. We'll wrap it up there. So really, really appreciate it. And if you don't already, guys, check out Stan and give him a follow on Instagram and YouTube.
Awesome, my friend. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure.